All right. So first off is a handy feature. Keyword handy. I'm talking about Handi-Books, a publisher that produced nearly 150 paperbacks between 1941 and 1959. Now that's spelled H like Henry, A like Apple, N like Nancy, D like David, I like Igloo. So not traditional spelling of handy, I guess it's handy with an I. To kick it off, let's go back in time to 1909. It was this year that James Lewis Quinn was born in Alabama. He would later form the Quinn Publishing Company, which was located in New York City. The company's claim to fame was that science fiction magazine called IF, which launched in March of 1952. That magazine ran through February of 1959 before being sold to Galaxy Science Fiction, who then ran it, like, I think through 1974, 75. But along with the IF publication, the Quinn Publishing Company also ran a paperback line. This is how Handi-Books began publishing, which was back in 1941. So Quinn Publishing Company starts by creating Handi-Books publisher. So the odd thing about Handi-Books is their early publications, their early books had staples. The binding was stapled instead of glued. So it's kind of odd, but this was because they were larger than the typical mass market paperback, but they were smaller than digest. So the initial size was 11.5 centimeters by 16 centimeters, which, if you'll recall, is the same as like the early Avon books, but slightly wider than, say, pocketbooks. So by the time the publisher reached number 34, their 34th book, which was 1945, they then moved into the more traditional, square spine. The numbering system, you talk about numbers, the numbering system was mostly cohesive. The first 8 books were unnumbered. Beginning with number 9, they printed the book number on the inside. And then beginning with number 10, the publisher would advertise the next upcoming book on the back of the book. With number 36, the book numbers became printed on the spines. In 1949, the publisher began to speed up production by releasing 2 books per month, and they continued that pace up until 1951. In 1946, they got a little ambitious, and they decided they were going to try to do another line called Handi Westerns, but it was a failure. It only lasted 4 books. And from what I gather, this address for Handi Westerns doesn't match the New York City address of the publisher. This one was headquartered in Kingston, New York, a separate location, which I think probably is where James Quinn actually lives, I think. But the first few books of this line of Handi-Books, first few books are called Odds on the Hot Seat by Judson Phillips, 1941. Decoy by Cleve Adams, 1942. This next one I'm even hesitant to say, but just forgive me for saying the title of this book. I mean, it was a different era. It was different back then. It's extremely racist now, but it's just the way things were back then. We've moved past this and became a better people, but the name of the next book is 12 Chinks and a Woman by James Hadley Chase, 1942. 7 Men by Theodore Roscoe. Curtains for the Copper by Thomas Polsky. That was 1942 as well. A Bullet in His Cap by Robert Fleming. That was also 1942. I mean, that's the first 6 Handi-Books paperbacks. But let me highlight for you some of the amazing writers and books that later were coming out on Handi-Books. So just to give you an idea, Lazarus by Richard Sale, Black Alibi by Cornell Woolrich, The Case of the Walking Corpse by Davis Dresser, using the name Brett Halliday of Mike Shane fame, I Wake Up Screaming by Steve Fisher, Up Jumped the Devil by Cleve Adams. No Good from a Corpse by Lee Brackett. Dead Little Rich Girl by Norbert Davis. Death About Face by Frank Kane. Hope to Die by Hilary Wall. We're going to be talking about Hilary Wall maybe in the next episode. Love to Burn by Peggy Gaddis. I mean, the names just keep on going. I mean, I'm looking down the list. Robert O. Saber, which was really Milton Ozaki. You've got Norman A. Fox, Robert Leslie Bellum, Edward S. Aarons, Harry Whittington, which on Harry Whittington, they published 3 of Harry Whittington's novels. Sleigh Ride for a Lady, The Lady Was a Tramp, and The Brass Monkey. And they could have published more of his stuff, maybe, and I just don't recognize the pseudonym. I don't know, but I know 3 of those books were, obviously the 3 Harry Whittingtons exist. Handi-Books mostly concentrated their 139 books on crime fiction, but they would put in some other types of genres. So they put in westerns and I think 3 science fiction novels. Let me look here. I made a little stat sheet here. So 139 different titles, 97 were mystery crime fiction, roughly 18 were science fiction books, 35 were westerns, and then there were a couple romance novels sprinkled in and reprints of earlier editions that sort of made it in as well. There were at least 7 Handi-Book publications that were originally published in magazine format. So 7 of these books were originally found in magazines. In terms of cover art, as the publisher grew, they were able to hire some really great artists. Guys like Norman Saunders, Victor Olson, Mike Privatello, and also, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, James Quinn himself did some artwork as well. So they were doing, obviously Handi-Books was doing well. They had some great authors. They had a great lineup. The artwork was looking great. But for whatever reason, by 1951, they folded due to poor sales, I guess. Probably had some stiff competition at that point. So they ended up going out of business. Handi-Books, folded. But as for their parent, Quinn Publishing, as I mentioned earlier, Quinn Publishing ended up moving on to If Magazine. In 1957 and 1958, 2 books emerged from Quinn that collected stories that were originally in the If Magazine. Those 2 books were called The First World of If and then The Second World of If. By the 1970s, this publisher had moved on to crossword puzzle books for God's sake, but that's where they had gone from 1941 to the 1970s. They'd gone from being a paperback publisher, doing a really respected science fiction magazine, and then just to see where they ended up at was kind of depressing, I guess. But James Quinn, he died in Kingston, New York in 1992. So there you have it, my little mini feature on Handi-Books. And I learned quite a bit in researching this publisher. How many of you out there have Handi-Books? If you do have some Handi-Books, on this episode post on the on Facebook or X, show me what you got. Show me some Handi-Books that you've got in your collection. I bet you have some cool covers. My sources for this feature was the excellent 15-page PDF that was authored by Kenneth Johnson and found on bookscans.com. And also used John Warren's Paperbacks Official Price Guide, first edition from 1991.